The Whicker Witch, a Haunted Library production. Before I get started with the story tonight, there's something I need to clear up with the title of my story. There's a movie out, and I know a lot of you have seen it, called The Wicker Man. Well, that's spelled W-I-C-K-E-R. My story is not to be confused with the movie, and was not taken from that at all. There's also a series out right now called The Witcher, and I guess that's on Netflix. I haven't seen it. I hear it's pretty good. It's all over my Facebook newsfeed. People are watching it. That is W-I-T-C-H-E-R, Witcher. Well, my story is The Whicker Witch with an H. W-H-I-C-K-E-R. Not the same, and was not taken from either of these. I just wanted to clear that up. I hope you guys enjoy the story. Tucked away in the northeastern corner of the state, Orangetown, Massachusetts, is breathtakingly beautiful. About 45 minutes from Boston, Orangetown gives off that classic New England feel with its churches and chapels. Long considered a coastal town, Mission Creek Oysters is Orangetown's star attraction, producing a large percentage of the state's oysters. In downtown, historical museums and Civil War monuments are scattered together in an array of eye-seeking attractions, along with plenty of locally favored pubs. On the outskirts of town, you'll find railroads and perfectly constructed colonial-style homes with a diverse amount of culture. Orangetown was the perfect place that I thought I was moving my family to. The perfect town I wanted to spend my last 40 or 50 years. It was, by all means, to be our retirement town. My name is Henry Bachman, and I'm a 50-year-old retired oil field worker from Oklahoma. I made a good living in the oil field in the last 20 years, and I wanted a change of pace in my early retirement, so we decided to take the plunge and move up north. For the first few months, everything was fine. Coming from a small southern town with not much scenery aside from the night sky and a few windmills, transitioning into a northern town with so many eye-catching attributes was a true dream come true. In fact, the town itself has been a wonderful experience for me, my 38-year-old wife Helena, and our 12-year-old son Luke. We've fallen in love with not only the town, but also the thought of living up north. But here in the last few weeks, things have taken a turn for the worse. Out of the blue. It started 3 days ago when I let Luke play outside in our backyard. Luke is a pretty big kid for 12, and he gets tired of riding his bike and playing on his tablet. So when he asked me to play in the backyard for the first time, I immediately said yes. I grew up playing in the dirt, mud, and sand, as my parents were too poor to afford bicycles, and I always catch myself trying to push those old nostalgic childhood habits onto my own son. But that decision to let him play in the backyard near those woods changed my life forever, because Luke didn't return home when dark came. At first I hadn't panicked, and simply went to the backyard and called his name, thinking that he'd probably climbed a tree or something a little ways into our tree line that led into some dense underbrush and woods. But after a few minutes of getting no answer, I decided to walk into the woods and search. My heart started to race a little as darkness closed in around me, and there was still no sign of Luke. I called his name louder, to no avail. That's when Helena came outside and started yelling his name, as panic began to set in. I emerged from the woods, trying to calm her. I went inside, grabbed a flashlight, and performed another search a few hundred feet into the woods, but there was no sign of my son. My wife spent this time screaming his name in the front yard, hoping that he'd strayed from the woods to go out front and play on his bike. I emerged from the woods and she ran to meet me, telling me she had no luck either. I decided then that we needed to call the police. A slew of officers performed a search. Tracking dogs picked up Luke's scent from the backyard into the tree line, but lost the scent about a mile into the dense woods. It's as if the scent completely vanished, the police had said. The dogs only wanted to run around in circles where the scent had stopped. My wife and I went home that night without our son, and he hasn't been seen since. Now we're going on day 4, and Helena is an absolute mess. I'm not holding up very well either, but I have to stay strong. I have to be the rock for her. Luke is our only child, our pride and joy. At this stage in our lives, we will most likely not have any more kids, and no kid could replace our Luke. I hold a lot of guilt for being the one who allowed him to go play back there unattended, but it wasn't like he was 7 years old and completely helpless. And that's what scares me, because the police think he's been abducted. I'm starting to feel that way too. A mountain lion attack has but all been ruled out. The search for my son is still ongoing, but I fear authorities will stop soon. The whole town is looking for him, and I couldn't be more grateful. I have spent the greater part of the last 3 days searching the woods myself, even after police have stopped for the night. I've gotten little sleep, my eyes are bloodshot and my body aches, but I couldn't sleep if I wanted to. My heart is broken for my boy. My brain won't let me rest. But today, Luke's disappearance became a bit more bizarre, and I don't know what to think. An elderly lady knocked at our door and woke me from a nap. Nearly as soon as I had passed out from complete physical and emotional exhaustion, the knock had jarred me awake. I jumped from our bed, beating my wife to the door even, hoping to see Luke standing there, waiting for us to let him inside. Disappointed, I asked the lady to come in. She introduced herself as Agatha Mason and told us she was 78 years old. For her age, she got around pretty well. Helena offered a seat in the dining room. As we all sat down at the table, Helena looked at me with a loving but worried expression. She knew I was about to have a nervous breakdown. I waited until Agatha caught her breath and asked, "How can we help you, Mrs. Mason?"
I come to you today with a heavy heart and some things I think you should know.
Now I was suddenly awake, anxious to hear what she knew about our son, presumably. She informed us that she too was from the South and had moved to Massachusetts in 1990. Her Southern accent confirmed it. "What is it, Mrs. Mason?" I asked, my eyes wide.
Please, call me Agatha. In the year 1988, I was given sole custody of my daughter's 3-year-old daughter, Kristen. My only daughter passed away of leukemia. Christian, her daughter, was given to me by the state.
I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I'm sorry to hear about your daughter."
To make a long story short, I decided to pack up my belongings and start somewhere else fresh to get away from those old memories. That's when we moved up here in the year 1990. Everything was fine for the first year. Then
Agatha lowered her head and covered her mouth. She was visibly upset. "Take your time," Helena had said, reaching for her hand and consoling her.
in October of 1992, Christian went missing. She was behind the house playing in the woods, the same woods that your son is now missing from, the Whicker Woods.
Wait a second. I glanced at Helena. You're telling me that your granddaughter hasn't been seen since 27 years ago? Agatha nodded, pain covering her dim eyes.
That's right, Mr. Bachman, 27 long years.
My God, my wife had gasped. I am so sorry, Mrs. Agatha held up a trembling hand.
Don't be. I dealt with my pain long time ago, and while it will never leave me, I have the bleeding stopped. Now I just live with the scar. As for you two, the wound is fresh, and I'm afraid the same monster that took my granddaughter has struck again.
At this point, I was so taken back by this I was left speechless. I could only stare at my wife, who too appeared shocked. I finally found my voice. And what would that be? What are you talking about here?
The Whicker Woods behind our homes hold evil in them. There's an old spirit in there. A woman died there in those woods in the early 1900s. It was rumored before her death that she was turned on to the occult and witchcraft. She froze to death out there in the real bad winter. Her name was Mary Whicker. Like you, she had a daughter that went missing in the woods. Mary searched for her but succumbed to the bad winter. Eventually, local authorities would find both bodies. Mary was clung to her daughter, laying over her in an effort to dry and shelter her from the wind and snow. Both had frozen to death.
I hesitated to call her crazy right there. I had no doubt she was telling the truth about the deaths. But what did that have to do with my Luke? Agatha, are you trying to insinuate that the ghost of Mary Whicker is responsible for my son's disappearance? She nodded.
And the disappearance of my sweet angel Christian.
Listen, I'm not one to disregard the spirit world, I said, my hand over my mouth, my eyes trying to close. But I think it's a stretch to think that your granddaughter and our son are now captive of this restless spirit of a woman who died 100 years ago.
I was skeptical too, until...
Until what? I asked finally, growing more impatient.
I was visited by Mary Whicker, the Whicker Witch. She comes at night to torment me. She still thinks I'm trying to take back my granddaughter.
Entertaining her notion, I said, "But if she's responsible for your granddaughter's disappearance, why would she have a reason to haunt you?"
Because I went into her woods, the woods she claims as hers now, and I challenged her. This was years ago when I could get around better. If you tread on the witch's sacred territory, you're cursed for life.
"Did you ever see anything?" asked my wife. Agatha nodded with a grim expression.
Plenty of times. It's said that if you look into her eyes, you'll go crazy. Thankfully, I avoided this.
I put my head down and placed my hands over my face, sighing loudly.
I'll be going now. I don't want to bother you two. You probably think I'm just a crazy old woman, but I came today to warn you. Don't go into those woods by yourself. There's a curse there. God bless you two, and I'll be praying for you.
I stood to walk her to the door. "I'll be going into those woods until my son is found. Thanks for coming over, Agatha. It was nice to meet you." I looked at my wife and shook my head after closing the door. We watched as she slowly made her way behind our house and through another backyard to get to her house. I didn't speak again before lying down. I was too frustrated, too disturbed, and too damn tired. I finally passed out. I slept the rest of the day and all through the nights, but my dreams were filled with terrifying nightmares. Today is day 4 of my son's disappearance. I feel like I'm going crazy. Trying to keep my wife upbeat and hopeful has been a challenge. Trying to keep myself in a positive mind frame has been a challenge in itself as well. It's 4 p.m. and there's still no leads on Luke's disappearance. Police are now talking about calling the search off. My hope of him coming home alive is fading. I still hold the hope that he's been kidnapped and will soon be found alive. I can't seem to get Agatha's words out of my head, though. I went to the library and pulled up the history of Orangetown and its public records. Sure enough, a Kristen Morrison went missing in 1992 that baffled local authorities. And a Mary Whicker was listed as missing from the year 1927. I left the library sure of one thing. Orangetown held a dark secret. Agatha had not lied about her granddaughter, but the circumstances surrounding the disappearance were still odd. I further investigated on Google and pulled up a few sites that had covered Kristen's disappearance. Somebody or something was taking kids, it seemed, ever so many years in this town. The rest of the day was spent comforting my wife, who mostly cried in my arms. I needed to realize that she needed me as much as Luke needed me, and Helena was here, unlike Luke. So I rested and held her close, shedding tears myself, until nightfall. Because when the sun went down, I was going back into the Whicker Woods, and I wasn't coming back out without our son. At 10 p.m., I told Helena I was going out to search for Luke, and that I would be back in a few hours. She knew that I wouldn't stop searching, and especially not this early into the disappearance. She didn't want me to go, but I persisted. She told me that she loved me and to be careful. I gave her a kiss and reminded her that she was the most important piece of my heart, and that we would get through this. But I knew deep down, without Luke, our marriage would never be the same. There would always be a void, an empty space, a dark memory, and a certain guilt that I carried. If Luke had not been kidnapped, then he had to be out there somewhere deep in those woods. I would go further than the police did. I had to find our son, tonight. I set off with a backpack and a heavy flannel shirt to protect me from the night chill. I brought along a bottle of water and some simple protein snacks. I was prepared to be out here all night if necessary. Walking through our backyard, I glanced at the house that Agatha said she lived in. Her house was clearly seen as I entered the woods. A back bedroom light was on and the blinds were pulled, and I could see her silhouette standing there, watching me. I stopped and looked back at her, taken back by this. I decided to ignore her gaze and keep going, entering the woods, but remembering her dire warning. As soon as I was a few feet in, darkness enveloped me. I walked with a purpose, steady and fast. I needed to cover some ground quickly. For the first 3 miles, I screamed out Luke's name until I began to lose my voice. It had taken me over an hour to cover this much ground. I only had a small flashlight to navigate by, and the trees were thick and the underbrush was mostly heavy. I was a little over 2 hours in and I heard his voice. I stopped, dead in my tracks, my heart pounding with excitement and relief. I waited and listened. I was sure that it had been Luke crying out in distress. "Luke! Can you hear me? It's your father! Where are you?" The deafening silence was sickening. All I heard were night sounds. Had I imagined his voice? I called out again, growing frantic. "Luke! Luke!" I became frustrated, knowing I couldn't search every square inch. I looked at my watch. It was almost 11:30, and it was getting cooler. For the next 30 minutes, I yelled his name as I stumbled through the branches and fallen limbs. Everything was silent aside from my own footsteps crunching the leaves and limbs, and the crickets. I stopped at a huge rock and sat down for a few seconds, thinking, the police said they had stopped where the tracking dogs had lost the scent. That's about 3 miles in. This would mean I'm at least a mile, if not more, past that point. That's when I heard something in the distance. It was the sound of running water. I stood and kept going north. Soon I was standing over a 3-foot bluff overlooking a dark creek. It was a wide, powerful creek, and it looked very deep. I scanned the waters with my flashlight. The current was strong. Then I heard Luke's cries from across the creek in the woods beyond. He was screaming, "Help me!" My heart rate elevated again at the sound of his voice. I called his name back, my voice lost in the gushing of the water. I hadn't been hearing things, and my son was alive. I shined my light down the embankment. Straight down by the water's edge was all mud. I was going to make a jump for it. I put my flashlight in my pocket and jumped. I hit the ground rolling right into the creek. I wasn't really shocked by the pull of the current as it tugged my body downstream. I finally was able to stand up, shivering, trying to get my composure in the cool water. I wiped water from my eyes and let my ears drain for a few seconds. Soaked, now I was really chilly. Luckily, my flashlight was still working. Fighting the current, I shined the light to the other side of the bank. The creek had to be 20 feet across. It was just massive. It was almost like a small river. And it was scary as hell out here in the middle of it, knowing that I could slip any second and go under again. The water was up to my chest, and I'm 6 foot tall. I slowly and carefully made my way parallel with the current. I could hear Luke's cries over the water now. They were very loud and very close. "Luke, hold on! Hold on, buddy! I'm almost over there!" Then his cries suddenly stopped. My hope bottomed out. I stopped too, about halfway in the middle of the creek. The hairs on the back of my neck stood erect. I was being watched. Never in my life had I felt such a heavy sensation course through me. It was foreboding, dark, and full of negative energy. I was frozen in the creek, and I'm not gonna lie, I was scared. I lifted my arm, holding the flashlight at head level. The beam penetrated the night with its yellow, narrow haze. I moved the light as I slowly made a complete turn in the water. Ah, shit! What? The light lit up the face of a hideous woman. Her hair was dirt black. Her eyes were black holes that had small, wild red pupils, and her face was the essence of evil. I screamed, jumping back, falling into the water. The current engulfed me as my vision went black. I inadvertently took in a mouthful of water before fighting my way to the surface. Oh, shit. Oh, Luke! I blasted out of the water on shaky legs, coughing and spitting, my lungs burning. I had just seen the Whicker Witch. I twisted around in the water, looking in every direction. I had lost my flashlight and backpack, and I was in complete darkness. I gasped for air, trying to catch my breath. My chest would not stop thumping. The water rushed past me, nearly up to my neck now. I took a dive forward, swimming underwater. The current pushed me downstream, but I continued to swim until I had to come up for air. When I did, I had reached the other side. I stumbled into the bank, my shoes sinking into the mud, my body flopping on the bank. From out of nowhere, Luke came running to me, wrapping his arms around me. I picked him up there in the darkness, running my hand through his black hair. I could barely see his face, but I was overjoyed that I was holding my son, and he was alive. I wanted to cry right there, but I knew I had no time for emotion. I told him to wrap his arms around my neck and not let go as I summoned the energy to stand. On my back with a tight grip, he clung to me as I walked into the water. I was determined to get to the other side. I walked through the current, but it was even harder with his body weight on me. The deepest part came to my chin. My legs were so weak, but I kept pushing forward. At any second, I expected the witch to pop up from the water to drown me and take my son. But she didn't, and I finally made it to the other side. I collapsed on the bank, more exhausted than I'd ever been in my life. Luke stayed close to me as I lay on my back, shaking from the chill. He was so brave, he didn't even cry. When I finally caught my wind, I stood. I heard a girl scream from the other side of the creek. "Don't go back, Daddy," Luke said, tugging my shirt. "That girl is dead. She's not real. I have been seeing her since the ugly lady took me. The ugly lady is making her stay with her." I thought about Agatha. Then I thought about her missing granddaughter, Kristen Morrison. "How do you know she's dead?" I asked, looking down at him. "Because she doesn't have any eyes, and she can disappear and reappear whenever she wants to." I had heard enough. I knew he wasn't lying, because I had seen the witch with my own 2 eyes. I grabbed his arm and we began to blindly navigate through the blackness of the woods. We were followed the whole way back by an unknown presence, though I had good idea of what that energy was. It was all around us. Whispers, groans, screams that a human couldn't possibly make. Crying and cackling mad laughter. Terrified, Luke's braveness had worn off. Now he was bawling his eyes out. We made it out of the trees nearly 6 hours after I had stepped into them. It was around 4:30 a.m. when I came out of the woods and entered my backyard. Helena had been waiting up. She came running from the house to meet us, where we all 3 shared a tearful but joyous embrace that no evil in this world could penetrate. It's been 2 weeks since Luke has come home. Helena and I plan on moving as soon as possible. We're putting the house up for sale. I am being plagued with nightmares. Every time I fall asleep, I dream about the Whicker Witch, stand behind me in that deep creek water, just as tall as me, staring into my soul with a malevolent grin. I don't know what would have happened if I wouldn't have fell back into the water away from her. Maybe she would have taken my soul too, like she did Agatha's granddaughter. I shiver of the day, and I shake at night uncontrollably. The doctors don't know why. I hear voices nobody else can hear. I sweat for no reason. Even though I know Luke is safe in the house, which he hasn't stepped outside since the morning he came home, I still fear that Mary Whicker will snatch him up, and this time never let him go, because she collects little kids, kidnaps them, kills them, hoping they will replace the daughter she had long ago, who froze to death with her. I was able to give Agatha closure for her granddaughter Kristen. I told her I heard her voice in the woods the night I rescued Luke. She fell into my arms and sobbed for 10 minutes straight. My wife has been watching after her since, comforting her. As for me, I haven't told my wife that the Whicker Witch has now made it into our home. I don't want to scare her. I don't want to scare my son. I just hope she'll go away, but I know she won't. For I have done what Agatha told me not to do. I have looked into those red, evil eyes, and now I think I may be becoming possessed. I would gladly let the witch take me in order to save my family. She visits my bed every night, sometimes at 2 a.m., sometimes at 4, sometimes at midnight, but always after dark. She transfixes me in place, freezes me the way a sleep paralysis dream would. As a matter of fact, as I lay here tonight and stare at the clock that reads 3:45 a.m., I can now hear the knob turn on our bedroom door. Helena is sound asleep. Luke is between us. If the witch takes me, my son and wife will be safe. The witch won't give up, and I know this. The entity floats to my bed and looks down at me. My madness coming to a head, I ease out of bed, stand, and face the Whicker Witch. Her tongue lashes out at my face, sucking the life out of me before she carries me out of the house into the woods beyond.